Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. I have some news for you. Edgar Wright is back. He is back to present to you his new film, Last Night in Soho. You were the first people, I think, on this continent to see the movie, certainly in this country, so welcome. I'm glad you're all here. My name is Cameron Bailey. I'm the artistic director and the co-head here at TIFF, and we are thrilled to be in day 2 of the Toronto International Film Festival. It's been a wild ride, and it's been a wild year for all of us. Doesn't it feel good to be in a theater with a giant screen, ready to be wowed? What we always want to do before we start every screening is to just take a moment to reflect on where we are. And we encourage you to do that as well, to reflect on the land that we're on and its history. Here in Toronto, we're located on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee. And this territory is within the lands that are protected by something called the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. You can look it up if you're not familiar. And it's home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We're grateful to work on this land, and we're grateful to be supporting the films of Indigenous storytellers. We also want to thank the people in the organizations who make everything we do at TIFF possible, including this festival. Our lead sponsor, Bell, our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oréal Paris, and Visa, and our major supporters on the public side, the Government of Ontario, Telefilm Canada, and the City of Toronto for their continued support. And a massive thank you also to Focus Features for providing us with this film tonight. I almost feel like Edgar Wright could have been a Torontonian. It's not too late. You will know what's now been called his Cornetto trilogy, Shaun of the Dead, and Hot Fuzz, and The World's End. Then he took the time to come to Toronto and make a whole movie here, Scott Pilgrim versus the World in 2010. Really put our town on the map, I think. And then, of course, Baby Driver in 2017. Just this year, he released a documentary, The Sparks Brothers. If you haven't seen that, definitely check it out. There's so many things to admire and to love about the films of Edgar Wright. For me, it is the sheer joy of watching movies that is in every single one of his films. He takes such care with presenting something that is electric and exciting and giving you something to think about every single time out. There's such insight in his films, which I absolutely love. And there's something new in this film as well. If you know all of his previous films, you'll feel the familiarity in some senses, but he's taking you in a new direction here as well, so it's always great to see that. He wrote this film with Krysty Wilson-Cairns, and they've come to present it to you tonight. Please join me in welcoming to the stage director Edgar Wright and co-writer Krysty Wilson-Cairns.
Thanks for being here. It is so surreal to be in a movie theater watching this with a crowd. You know, I feel so kind of fortunate to be doing this and so grateful to kind of be here. Yesterday, I took my first transatlantic flight in 20 months, and it's nice to be back. And my first time with a film at TIFF, actually, I was here in 2007 as part of the lab, but it's my first time with a film here, so I'm very excited. And, you know, it's just, you know, I'm sure you guys have been indoors for the last 18 months, like a lot of us, and so I know that this kind of means a lot to just kind of be all together in person watching a film, and I don't take it for granted, and I'm very excited for you to watch the movie tonight. the movie speaks for itself. I mean, I think I can, me and Krysty, you can take your mask off. I just realized I only saw Cameron's face as I came out because he had his mask on backstage. So me and Krysty have both probably, in our time in London, spent more time in Soho than we have on any couch in any of the flats that we've lived in. I've lived in London for 26 years, and the area has always been a sort of a source of obsession, so as you'll see in this movie. It's been an emotional journey sort of making the movie on a number of levels, not just the pandemic. Diana Rigg is obviously no longer with us, and actually tonight is a year since Diana passed away. So we're so happy that we got to work with her, and let's watch the movie. Please enjoy Last Night in Soho.
Before we start, I just want to let you know that Edgar and Krysty will be back after the screening for a Q&A, and they'll be joined by the star of the film, Thomasin McKenzie, who will be beaming in from New Zealand for you. So stick around for that.
I'd like to welcome Thomasin McKenzie, all the way from New Zealand.
Hey,
there she is.
this is so weird because I can only see myself. I don't know how to change that.
We've already seen you big on the screen for 2 hours. It's fine.
But Thomasin, did you have a fascination with the 60s before this role?
I think so. I think definitely for the 60s style. But I think I only really started putting a lot more research into it, or became more interested in it once I started talking to Edgar, and once the kind of audition process for Last Night in Soho began. That's when I started reading books about the fashion designers back then, like Mary Quant, and kind of listening to a lot more 60s music and films and all that kind of stuff.
I understand that Edgar put together a syllabus of 60s cinema, and I'm curious what was on that syllabus and what maybe had the biggest impact on you, Thomasin.
I think there was like Don't Look Now and Repulsion. There were kind of a few more obscure films like Beat Girl, or kind of less known ones, I suppose. Things like An American Werewolf in London, I think it's called, which I know is one of Edgar's favorites, and a whole range. There was Suspiria, which is one that I never ended up watching because that was just too far for me. Not naturally a horror watcher, so I was like, I need to kind of, I need to have a limit because I don't want to be having nightmares throughout the entire shoot. I think definitely like Repulsion was definitely one that stood out to me. But another film I watched that wasn't on Edgar's list was it was The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, because I took a lot of inspiration from Rooney Mara's performance in that to apply it to my character. I definitely took from took inspiration from a lot of films. I loved working with Edgar because I got such a great education on film and on music, because he's got such an incredible knowledge of all of that.
I mean, that's the thing. This is a horror film, but I feel like just like every John Carpenter movie is a Western, every Edgar Wright movie is a musical. There's so much choreography in this film, specifically that first sequence into the 1960s, and the subsequent dance sequence and all the mirror gags. I know your career, Edgar, and I know that even watching Scott Pilgrim with the bathroom transition into the fantasy sequence, you're doing a lot of this stuff in camera. So can you describe kind of what went into some of those sequences and some of those tricks that you applied?
Yeah, well, it's actually the second movie I've done where I love working with choreographers, and it was the second movie after Baby Driver where I had a choreographer on set the entire time. And we had this amazing choreographer, Jennifer White, who worked with us, not just on the dance sequences, but like movement throughout the whole movie, because even beyond the dance sequences, I wanted it all to feel very dreamlike, and a lot of that was in connection with the music or in connection with the lights, and then in the sequences with the mirror stuff, I mean, basically, like, there's more happening in camera than you would think. Like, so a lot of it is kind of like old school, like magic trick stuff, which really, it can be done. It just requires a lot of rehearsal, and it requires actors and actresses, you know, to just kind of, I mean, Thomasin and Anya did an amazing job, and, you know, but it's a team effort. It's like, it's not just like, it's the production design, it's like, it's the camera operator, like, has to kind of be in exactly the right place at the right time. So that shot on the dance floor where they're sort of switching between the two is not a motion control shot. It's kind of like really in camera. And maybe eventually, like 6 months later, you'll get to watch the behind the scenes video. It shows you just kind of how crazy it is with like, anytime there's a switch, Thomasin or Anya are running around the other side of the camera. But that stuff is just, I wanted it to feel, obviously because it's so surreal in those sequences, but there's elements of it where it's really happening. What you're seeing in the shot is really there. Like, so if Matt Smith and Anya are talking at the bar and Thomasin's in the mirror, Thomasin's really standing there. It's not like a separate shot done on a green screen. She, as an actress, is with the other actors. And that sort of continued all the way through. So lots of kind of like tricks like double sets and things like mirrors that are there that then slide back within the camera. That happens in that shot in the phone box where Matt and Anya are kissing, and then when Matt's head comes back, a mirror slides across and reveals Thomasin, on the other side. So there's more going on in camera than you would think.
What was that experience like as an actor, Thomasin, to be in these sequences of intense choreography?
Yeah, it was a very big challenge for me. I'm not a natural dancer, or not naturally confident in kind of movement, I suppose, or in my body. So it was really amazing to work with Jenny, the choreographer, because she just, I don't know, taught me a lot, and we had a lot of fun rehearsing all those dance sequences, especially like the opening sequence where Ellie's dancing by herself in her room, and the Café de Paris stuff. And it was the most satisfying thing to work so hard and do so many takes of the same movement, and finally for it to click and for it to work. That was a lot of fun. And I worked with my best friend Kiki, who's a contemporary dancer in New Zealand, and she kind of helped me to feel more confidence in my body, and to kind of, we were like rolling around on the floor and dancing around and doing a dance technique called 5 rhythms. So I definitely put a lot of work into kind of picking up that confidence. But it was probably I think the most complicated shoot I've ever done, and I had to write a timeline for myself that I constantly referred to, because it really is like, it's just constant, it's relentless, and it's so full of adrenaline and energy. So yeah, it was a big challenge, and it was a big leap from what I was used to from Leave No Trace like films. So yeah, it was a really great learning curve, and I think for my career I'm just keen to kind of do a whole range of stuff, and also to just try all the different ways of approaching a character, because there's no one way of acting. So yeah, it was amazing.
In developing the story, was the idea of a fashion student always one of the central conceits? I'm interested, Krysty and Edgar, in writing this story. The idea to focus the story on a fashion student, where did that come from? What was the inspiration for that? Was that a bit Suspiria too, to find like the idea of going to a school?
Well, I think it was just, kind of art college in London and fashion college is there's famous ones like Central St. Martin's and the London College of Fashion, which we really shot in. So we shot in the real London College of Fashion. It just seemed like the obvious thing in terms of, I like the idea of like Eloise growing up with her grandmother and becoming obsessed with the decade through that. Because I guess in a way that was my my obsession with the 60s started with my parents' record collection, which was very slim. It was like, started in 1964 and ended when they had my big brother. And there were no other albums after that. So their record collection was like 64 to 70 and then stop. And so that was where and then I think in a way, like part of the thing is the obsession with the 60s. Sometimes when you talk to people who are actually there, their stories about the 60s are really vague, and my parents' stories were frustratingly vague. So there's an attempt to kind of like find out more. My mum and dad's only story about the 60s is that they would argue about whether they'd seen Jimi Hendrix or not. And my dad would say they'd seen Jimi Hendrix, and my mum said, no, we didn't see Jimi Hendrix, we saw Pink Floyd. And I'd be like, what were Pink Floyd like? And my mum would go, awful. And that was the sole extent of their 60s stories. So then I'm like, and then what else happened? You know, so there's that puppy doggish thing with Eloise. And then I think also, like, we didn't go to fashion college, but I went to art college in Bournemouth, and I moved to London when I was 20, and you came from Glasgow to London. So lots of people have had that country mouse experience. So there's a lot of that like, it might not seem like it comes from, that Eloise comes from me, but there's literally lines said to her that have been said to both me and Krysty.
And Krysty, your relationship with the 60s, did your parents also have a record collection as Slim?
No records in my house. There wasn't a lot of music, actually. But there was a lot of fashion. My gran was a seamstress. And that line about how they used to go to London and they couldn't afford the clothes, but they would copy clothes, that was my parents, my gran. And I think, like, for women, the 60s fashion is, like, constantly recycled. So, like, every 5-6 years, there's, like, 60s fashion again. And it's so easy to think, oh, cool, miniskirt. Oh, yeah, that's great. Oh, yeah, I love a beehive hairdo. And then, you know, when you get into the nostalgia of it and you scratch behind the kind of awesome fashions, you're like, oh, maybe it wasn't the best decade to live in as a woman.
My mum was also, my mum and dad went to art college, and my mum used to make clothes. And the name of the mean girl in the film, Jocasta, is, my mum would tell me what I would have been called if I was a girl, and the name was Jocasta. So that is why she called that. My mum hasn't seen the film yet, so I don't know how she's going to react to that.
I lost my train of thought just imagining that. Sorry, Jocasta Wright.
Jocasta
All right.
Wright.
The other question I wanted to ask was about the ghosts in the film, and specifically, we had an email conversation right after I had first seen the film. That one of the influences for the film was the Stone tapes, and the idea that we're not dealing with souls that are left behind, but the reverberations of the past. And I think that ties in also to this idea that nostalgia is something that can be dangerous. It can be something that is a trace of the past that can be romantic and seductive, but also it can blind oneself.
Yeah, I mean, there's lines in the film that I believe when Diana Rigg says that somebody's died in every room in London, I believe that. And that's the thing is that, you know, the buildings in London are like, you know, we've both lived in Soho, you know, and worked there, and like those buildings are 400 years old. And, you know, some people walk around a city never thinking about the past. And then both of us have overactive imaginations, like sitting in a room thinking, what have these walls seen? But you know, then there's two theories on ghosts. Is like the more traditional idea is that ghosts are like souls left behind in torment, you know, with unfinished business that can't go to heaven or hell, and they're on earth in purgatory. And then there's the other idea, which is the sort of thing that's in the stone tape, and which also comes from real, you know, a lot of people believe this is a sort of psychic phenomena, is the idea of like the psychic energy that's left behind from an event. And I just we like the idea that Thomason's character is so sort of supernaturally gifted that she's so attuned to kind of what's happened in a room, you know, that it can send her spiraling backwards.
By the time the climax hits, there are so many creative ways to dispatch a person that occur in this film. It feels like almost you haven't made this is a horror film that's like a straight horror film in so long. Was this almost like I have to get them all out? Like there's just so many stabs that are just so creatively achieved. Are there any on the cutting room floor? Like it feels like you packed them all in.
I don't know. That was an interesting Saturday showing all that stuff.
Like who's responsible? Who's the chief effects supervisor for that sequence? They're just such incredibly gnarly effects sequences.
It's a great kind of guy called Barry Gower. I mean, what was great about it was just kind of trying to work out as much stuff to happen in vision, like, you know, to try and do as much kind of practical stuff was the sort of key. Maybe because, you know, like the scenes are in the 60s, you know, like there's some great digital effects work as well, but it's all like I love when all of the departments can work together and it's a combination of physical and digital effects.
Well, there's also, again, just a choreography on set, too, with all those elements, too. And I've spoken to a lot of filmmakers, and at times the days that they're feeling the most charged is when everyone has something to do and everyone is working in harmony. Were there days like that on this production? I imagine there were.
I feel like every day was like that. I mean, Thomasin can probably attest to that as well. There's a lot to think about in terms of sort of just choreography, because there's like, you know, music cues and lighting cues, and it was, you know, even just the kind of like the lights are all in time with the music, which is something that hopefully in the finished thing looks incredibly, you know, really works, but like it's such a headache to actually do on set. And so there's sometimes, you know, you'd find yourself in a really complicated scene standing there thinking, whose idea was this? It was my idea. I'd be grumbling in the corner saying that to myself all the time. Why do I make it so difficult for myself? But but you know, it's an amazing collaboration between so many, you know, like, I can't say enough good things about our production design and costume and makeup, and first time working with a cinematographer, Chung Hoon, you know, who's worked with Park Chan-wook and did The Handmaiden, like an amazing DP. And then in terms of complication, maybe this is a good thing to ask Thomasin about as well, is just shooting the 60s scenes on the street in London, in Soho. Not like Soho faked somewhere else, or not on a backlot, but really in Soho. And there are days that I come to the set thinking like, are we gonna pull this off? Because like, in a big city like London, you can close bits of road, but you can't, even that shot when Thomasin first walks into the 60s.
The Thunderball shot.
There's like, it's like outside the Café de Paris, it's like tons of period cars and extras, and we have, City of Westminster said you can shoot from like 10:30 to 2:30, but you have to leave one lane open for modern buses. So, you know, that just adds an extra level of difficulty to it. Maybe Thomasin, you can talk about shooting.
What was that day like, the Thunderball premiere day?
It was intense. It's interesting because that is such a huge scene, isn't it? And a really memorable scene of the movie. But for me, just every single scene of the film was that big. That, I don't know, I was so like equally affected by all of it. I will say it was the most intense introduction to London that I think anyone could possibly have, to be filming in the middle of the night on the streets of Soho, and kind of drunk kids walking in and out of the frame or shot and refusing to get out of the way so that we could get our scenes done before the sun came up. That was another big challenge for the night shoots, which we did 3 weeks of, was that we were really kind of having to work with the sun, rushing to beat the sunrise. So yeah, there were a lot of challenges and a lot of obstacles. But like Edgar was saying, that every single person in every single department put so much effort into it. It was a big job, but I think we all really believed in the film and believed in Edgar, so we were willing to do the work to get it done. And it paid off because it looks incredible.
Yes, applause from the audience. But speaking of collaboration, I mean, your role is so intimately connected with Anya Taylor-Joy's role, and what was your collaboration together on developing both your characters independently and then coming together as a performance that at times becomes one performance?
It was, I think, the biggest kind of part of our preparation together was the fact that we were doing a lot of dance rehearsals together. Anya is an incredible dancer. I think she was a ballet dancer. So right from the get-go, I was trying to not mimic her, but kind of trying to give off a similar kind of conviction or courage, or like just, I don't know, just that energy that she gives off in the film of such like grace. It's so beautiful. And so I was trying to emulate that, just as Ellie, my character, was trying to as well. So we spent a lot of time with each other during the dance rehearsals and literally just copying each other's movements. Like in the mirror scene, where we first see Anya, we rehearsed that so many times where we were just mirroring each other, which we had a lot of fun with. Also, Anya is just such a wonderful, open person, and I really felt supported by her throughout the whole shoot. She's really caring and just a wonderful, wonderful human being. So I was very lucky to have worked with her in such an intimate way. Yeah, also it's so weird because like I always felt like such a creep, honestly, because so much of my scenes with Anya were literally just watching her and Matt. So and not very rarely actually interacting with her. So I don't know. I just thought that was funny.
You also have a number of 60s luminaries in the cast. You mentioned Diana Rigg, and I encourage everyone to read a really terrific piece that Edgar wrote in The Guardian about your experience with her. But I would love to hear some Terrence Stamp stories.
I mean, I want to tell a Diana story as well. I mean, it was amazing having Rita Tushingham, Terrence Stamp, and Diana Rigg in the movie. Like, Rita, who plays Thomasin's grandmother, was 18 when she made A Taste of Honey with Tony Richardson, and Thomasin was 18 making this film. And then, like, Terrence Stamp sort of like, well, I'll tell you one good Terrence Stamp story. When he came into the pub set, we shot at the Real Toucan and then we recreated the basement, and Terrence came in to do that scene, and he said, I haven't been in a pub in 40 years. And then he took one of those coasters and he flipped it up and caught it in his hand, and he goes, I haven't done that in 4 years either. And I said, you should do that in the scene when you say, you know, she says, oh, I hear you used to be quite the ladies' man. He goes, what? Still am, still got it. I said, still got it, flip, catch. And I said, and every time you do it on camera, I'll give you £10. Which I did. So like, I was really like suddenly giving like Terrence Stamp like a bar trick to do. But after he bragged that like I haven't done that in 40 years, it's like, now do it 7 times. But so he was amazing. I mean, there was also things with Diana. There was one particular moment which was like, it's so strange how it kind of like becomes the sort of the film in a sort of, in you know, kind of just sums up the entire movie, is that we were like rehearsing one day, and she's not in the Café de Paris scene, but I happened to mention that the amazing Café de Paris set that Marcus Rowland did was behind us. We were sort of in this rehearsal room, and we were next door to this set. And she goes, oh, I went to the Café de Paris on my 18th birthday to see Shirley Bassey's first London gig. So I was like, oh my God. And I said, well, before you go, do you want to come and see the set? She goes, oh, I'd love that. So they had the incredibly like magical, almost ethereal experience of, you know what it's like walking through an empty stage, but with Dame Diana Rigg on your arm, walking into the Café de Paris. And she said, she saw the set and she said, this is amazing. Your production design has done such a great job, my God. And she said, it's a little bit bigger than the original, isn't it? I said, it is a little bit bigger. She goes, well, it just looks incredible. And then there's this pause, and then she goes, I remember walking down those stairs and all of these roomy-eyed men looking me up and down like a piece of meat. And it was kind of so interesting in terms of like talking to Terrence and Rita and Diana, very much in the sense of the film where like, sort of almost like the point of the movie where like, you know, kind of dangerous to just be be romantic about the past and sort of only remember the good stuff. And whenever you talk to them, there's always this ... before kind of they would talk about the other part, because they were there. And it's like, so kind of when there's, you know, this is almost like sort of how I'd been before when you meet somebody there and you sound like a sort of like a, you know, kind of a puppy dog saying, oh, what was it like in the 60s? And of course, like, there was more to it than just the good stuff. You know, and so that's kind of what the movie was about, is that it's kind of dangerous, as we well know from recent history. It's dangerous to say the good old days at all. There is no perfect decade. And that's sort of what the movie's about. It's like a cautionary tale for time travelers in a way.
And on that note, I wish everyone at home to give a big round of applause to Edgar Wright, Krysty Wilson-Cairns, Thomasin McKenzie, and remember to vote for the film.
Thank you, Thomasin.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming.